Welcome back to Speak and Serve, and today we are talking about creativity. Have you lost that creative spark that you perhaps had as a child? Today I'm joined by Jodie Newman, who does creativity every day and has inspired me over the last few days with her creative blueprint to be more creative. There you go, pen and post-it at the ready, just to show you that she has made me leap into my creative side. Jodie, welcome to our conversation today. How are you?
I'm very well, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I'm so pleased to see appearance of the post-it notes so early on.
I'm reading your light bulbs, by the way. Anybody who is listening, Jodie's got a purple, pink and blue light bulb by her side. What's the idea behind that then, Jodie?
So I do talk a lot about bright ideas because that is the lifeblood for me of, running a business. And, I think there's the obvious analogy of the light bulb, but I think it does work because it's all about illuminating, kind of new ways of thinking. And those aha moments where suddenly the light goes on and you see something you've never seen before. That for me is where you're getting into the kind of the creative goodness of it all.
Well, we're going to dive into some techniques and strategies around that. But first of all, Jodie, why do you do what you do? And contentiously, what gives you the right to tell us about creativity today?
Yeah, how very dare I, Chris? So I am a creative by heart and by training. So I trained as a furniture designer many years ago at the Royal College of Art. And as I was doing that training, I got fascinated by the psychology of creativity. So you would turn up one day in the studio and you couldn't stop the ideas coming. They were just kind of flowing out the end of your pencil. And the next day you'd be trying to crack a design brief and there'd be literally nothing. It'd be tumbleweed across the brain. And I got fascinated by what was going on. So I started my own kind of more slightly academic research about the psychology of creativity, how we have good ideas, how, what is happening when we're not having ideas. And really that whole kind of duality of the practical, doing it every day, doing creativity, and then understanding what kind of sat behind that, converged really to when I started my business 23 odd years ago, where for me, it was all built on a foundation that great ideas can grow businesses. I saw it happen. I worked with marketing agencies doing idea generation sessions to help them win pitches, answer briefs. Because I think, as individuals, teams and companies, businesses, we all end up with a kind of a bit of an organisational thing. We have a territory of thinking and it's nice and comfortable, it's nice and well trodden, but we need to vault those fences to access new thinking. And that's where kind of transformation happens.
Very good. One of the reasons I wanted to bring you onto the show was because as speakers, as people that have to communicate and equally become attractive or get people's attention, we have to sometimes come up with innovative, creative messaging, ideas, concepts, and methods to literally stand out in the war of attention. But some people just say, Chris, I'm just not creative. What would be your response to that kind of mindset?
Yeah, I hear that a lot when I run idea generation sessions. There may well be somebody in the room that says exactly that, Chris. For me, there is no such thing as a creative person and an uncreative or non-creative person. I would say it's like saying I'm a scuba diving person or I'm a not scuba diving person when no one's actually put their toes in the water yet. For me, creativity is, in fact, there was some research. It's my belief, but also Harvard Business School did some research around this. And what they posited was that 20% of our creative power, our creative talent is inherent, which means that 80% is a skill. So the fact you don't feel creative is a bit like me saying I don't feel like a pro tennis player. I just haven't practiced yet. It's not to say everyone's going to be a creative virtuoso by the end of it, but we all have a massive capacity to improve because it's a skill. And skills need practice, training, support, encouragement, and all those things. So those people who say, I'm not very creative, they just haven't practiced yet.
That's interesting, though, because from my perspective, I would have thought it would have been the other way around, that when we were born and we have that creative play innate with us, that would be me thinking, well, I've got 80% creativity locked into my natural child, and then 20% could be the skill set of actually honing that and applying that to business. But surprising there that it's already something that we can learn and become a part of. Do we get it knocked out of us, though, as we go through our formative years, childhood, education? Do we stifle our creativity naturally because of belief that somebody's going to scorn us or admonish us for being a little bit weird or wacky?
Yeah, I mean, I think we tend not to stifle it ourselves. Something else stifles it. There was a great piece of research done in the late 60s by two systems scientists, George Land and Beth Jarman, and they created a creativity test. It was all linked to the fact that NASA was frustrated about not getting people in working within their environment that had the creativity to solve, some of the biggest questions that anyone was asking in the universe. And they were so frustrated about it. So so this test was devised, and they tested a great big group of 5-year-olds in just about to kind of tip into education. 95% of those kids scored creative genius level. So generally, everybody as a human is inherently creative. They're maximizing that inherent 20%. They then retested those kids pretty much after the lion's share of their education had been done, age 15, and just 12% now achieved creative genius level. And you can see where this is going, Chris. By the time that group were adults, 2% achieved it. We are educated out of our creativity generally. Some people are very lucky, and have that nurtured within creativity. On the whole, creativity, certainly in the Western world, is designed to really squeeze it out, because it's difficult to kind of datarize creativity. It's difficult to mark improvement. And really, that's the only thing that current education is obsessed with. So there is no room in current education to allow creativity in all its messiness and all its weirdness, because education is binary. You're right or you're wrong, regardless of what you're doing, whether it's an arty subject, whatever that is, or whether it's maths. But in fact, you need to embrace the grey in order to splash around in the puddles and the depths of creativity.
Fair enough. So I'm going to appoint you as the Chief Education Minister, Jodie.
Please don't.
Give you a magic wand. Where would be a lesson to a teacher, perhaps, that might be listening, or a parent that is feeling that creativity is being educated out of their children? What would be your magic wand tactic to try to make sure that the children that we are bringing up in the world stay creative?
Well, I think for any teacher, I'd say go and listen to Ken Robinson. He says it and, does it so much better than I ever would. He's an absolute hero of mine. But I think in terms of, parents with a kid, it's the bit that we all grit our teeth and they go, why? And they go, why? Why, mummy? Why, daddy? Why? It's one of the most powerful creative questions you can ask. And, we tend to shut it down because we're busy or we don't know the answers. I mean, I had a classic one with my kids when they were younger. Mummy, why are there holes in bagels? I mean, Google becomes your best friend, but also reflecting back. So why do you think? And you are opening up that curiosity. And I think we tend to close down our curiosity because then it becomes about nosiness, and somehow nosiness is bad. Nosiness is brilliant. Stick your nose in everywhere. Be curious. Ask why all the time. Why is it like that? Why, how do we do that better? Why is that happening? Why is that not happening? And I think, that kind of challenge isn't often welcomed in the classroom because, again, it doesn't offer a binary solution. And I think as parents, as much as you want to kind of run away in a dark room and hide from like the 89th time someone's asked you why, encouraging that creativity, that curiosity, will help them keep that thread going. Because once they lose that curiosity, it is more difficult, obviously, to get it back than to keep building on it.
So it sounds like it also is perhaps a contact sport of intentional listening when we say, but why, mummy? But why, mummy? We don't just say, just because it is, okay? We'll have to almost foster that feeling of encouraging creative questioning to enable the learning to be able to be cemented into the way that we're operating.
Yeah, and I think also for me, there is, I mean, my two kids have grown up as digital natives, and as much as I could, I encouraged them to use their hands and make and touch and feel, because I think in the world where we are interfaced mainly with a screen, we forget the power and the creativity that is sparked by using materials, by making something, by building something, by making something that falls down, by making something that towers above us. All these things. I mean, I ask my clients to print. If I'm working remotely with them, I will get them to print stuff out. And I'm like, please have a doodle. While you're thinking, right, there's something that happens between the physicality of writing or drawing and your brain and your creativity that you don't get when you're tippy-tapping on a screen. And I think there is something when I work in the room with clients, I have a set of tools. We physically build a three-dimensional representation of their business, and I can see that the thinking is different at the point at which you are physically navigating round a three-dimensional representation of your business. And we lose that, and the kids, I think, are losing it more and more because their entire lives are lived down the screen. And this, this touching stuff and building stuff and mucking about with stuff tends to get lost. And as adults, we're terrible at doing that.
Question around the brain. I've heard about left brain, right brain thinking. Where does the creative juice come from in terms of the way that this structure forms in our heads?
So let's caveat this by I'm not a neuroscientist. So, there is the classic left brain, right brain. What I talk about more is using and utilizing that subconscious piece. So that's where, for me, from the reading that I've done, the heavy lifting of the creativity happens. So you can consciously sit and think about a problem. I think we've probably all experienced this. You're staring down the barrel of your problem or your business challenge, and you're kind of intently, consciously creating ideas. And it's such hard work doing it that way. For me, it's much more about putting your mindset in the right place. And I talk about, as part of my create framework, the environment you're in, finding your creative place, wherever that is, to encourage it. Also, a lot of people find that walking the dog, going on the bus, in the gym, in the car, these are all great places. They have something in common. And that is, and it came out some research, I think it was done in the 70s, about the ideal kind of mindset where your brain is most primed to generate ideas. And it's what they called where your conscious brain is mildly diverted, which frighteningly is often when you're driving. We all think we are 100% consciously paying it. No, of course we're not. So where there is mild diversion of your conscious brain, it kind of allows it just to move to one side a bit and let that subconscious creativity start really, powering up. So what I would say to people is find where you feel that you're most creative, whether that's going for a walk in the forest or down the high street or wherever that is. But before you do that, before you get to your creative place, brief your brain. So write your challenge on a Post-it note on a scrap of paper, just like 10 words, how to create a, fantastic newsletter that 1 million subscribers get excited by. You then fold that piece of paper up and you do a physical act of hiding it. Shove it in the back of your drawer, shove it down your welly. I don't really care where. And then your brain is briefed and primed. Your subconscious can get on with that challenge while you go about your day. So building that into moving into your creative space is kind of, leveling up how you're going to be able to think creatively about it. Because I think we've all had that moment, like when you're in the shower and you go, oh, I've just thought of an idea. As your kind of subconscious going, well, here's an idea, and throwing it forward so you are then conscious of it.
Mm.
Then the challenge becomes, if you're driving or in the shower, how the hell do I write that down before I forget it? But, that's another challenge.
Well, I heard a rumor that Einstein used to get in a zone where he would literally go so sleep deprived, and he would have a sloping desk and the pen would roll down, and at the point of sleep it would then fall off and then hit the floor, and that's when he would capture some of his best thoughts. So was there a transitioning point between waking and sleeping when the creative begins to become even more lucid for us?
Yes, there is. I did a survey of business owners asking them where they got their best ideas and where they never got good ideas for their business. No surprise that the worst place for creativity is sitting at your desk, which is a shame because it's where we spend most of our time. But one of the places or spaces where they did find creative sort of fertility was that period of just falling asleep. So, I wouldn't claim to know the kind of the neuroscience of it, but it is definitely where you are almost powering down. In the same way you might get into it, lots of people talk about running as a good way of, getting that brain into that state where it's that rhythmic kind of, you're zoned out in a way. And lots of people find that really powerful time to then have those ideas come to them. So it's definitely a common, phase of the day where creativity really flourishes.
So my grandmother's adage of why don't we just sleep on it actually has some credence to it in terms of allowing the thought to sink and seep in and then come out with some clarity as to what the right direction is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, I do have a notebook by my desk because I have woken up in the middle of the night and thought, oh my God, that's the idea that's going to make me a fortune. You fall asleep and then you wake up again in the morning and you're like, I have no recollection of what that was at all. Yeah. So, it is about capturing it because ideas are quite gossamer thin when they come to you. There's no substance to them yet. Ideas are rarely fully formed and ready to launch. They're like, I'll often say they're like baby birds. Don't just fling them out the nest. They are going to plummet onto the concrete. They need a bit of nurture. They need some time. Sometimes it's an idea whose time just yet hasn't come, which is why I encourage people to create an ideas bank where you are putting all these kind of half-baked notions. And some of the things I write down in my notebook, I don't really even know what they mean, but it's come to me and it's got, your kind of spidey sense starts to tingle. And you're like, ooh, I don't know why it's interesting, but it is. So I'll capture it. And then you can dive back in and it's a massive source of inspiration, again, to kickstart more ideas.
Yeah. Where are you in the habit of just start, because even if it starts and it's awful, at least you're starting. But sort of James Clear tactic of I want to be a writer and therefore I must just get in the practice of doing 5 minutes of writing, and that can sometimes lead to 15 minutes of gold. Where are you in that advice, Jodie?
Yeah, I often talk to my clients about a creative habit of sitting down at your desk, or even before you sit down at your desk, but sometimes it's too late. You've sat there, but before you open up your email, before you do anything else, you might have your coffee, you grab your Post-it notes or your notebook and you do a 60-second creative workout. You can look at your coffee cup, you can pull the teaspoon out, and you can say, I've got a minute to think of as many ways to improve this teaspoon as possible. Now, there's only one rule in these exercises: be ridiculous. I talk a lot about ridiculous thinking because that is where you enable the best creativity to flourish, whilst you cannot be ridiculous and have your inner critic active. So being ridiculous means you kind of put a duct tape over your inner critic's mouth and you've locked it in the garage and you aren't, you're not seeing it for a while. Be ridiculous. So, improving a teaspoon by making it sing a little song as it stirs your coffee, or, it kind of is an automatic extender so you can share your dessert with the person across your, the table. Or you can actually spend 60 seconds thinking up ideas of how to make a teaspoon worse. It doesn't matter what it is, using that kind of improve, make it worse. 60 seconds, how to use a polo mint in a variety of different ways. I mean, there's just hundreds of things. You can never run out of these things because you can just use inspiration from around you. But just 60 seconds or so every day is getting that creative habit. Yeah. And the idea, particularly because what you're encouraging your brain to train in is that divergent thinking, options thinking. And business, certainly school and business, we're running things. I call it, we're really deep into the business as usual. You need business as unusual. That's how you're going to innovate your business forward. So you really need to kind of practice these techniques of thinking of 100 ways to use a polo before you engage your critical framework of evaluation. That's where you start to train and hone your creative skills.
What about, let's just say I've got this great idea to have a minute mindset speaking about my fountain of knowledge on my chosen topic. But then the little inner critic comes in and says, yeah, but Chris, come on, who do you think that you are talking about minute mindset? All these people out there, they're more knowledgeable, more experienced and more skilled than you. No, don't even go there. How do we turn to that inner critic of self-doubt being when we're creative?
So I think for me, it is difficult because, in order to be creative, you have to be brave, because the closer you get to novel and to innovation, the closer you get to failure. So, sometimes a great idea is one flash of inspiration and 5,127 iterations to get it better. And I use that number because that's slightly tongue-in-cheek. That's how many prototypes Dyson created of his bagless vacuum before it went to market. So it is just a question, for me, I always say, get it to good and get it out there. That's the only way you're going to know. Yeah. And you are, yes, brace for failure, and also brace optimistically for it to absolutely fly, and just see what happens. Because we could be convinced an idea is amazing and you launch it and there's tumbleweed. And other times you go, I'm just going to try this, and it goes wild. So there is always that. And I always stop my clients achieving that perfection, because one, you never achieve it. And I think that remaining 15-20% where you've got to good, but you're honing and you're honing and you're honing to really try and get it as perfect as possible, that bit's invisible to your audience. They literally do not see that. So get it out, see, test and measure it, understand that failure, which I know comes with masses of baggage. So, rather than saying, well, this might be a failure, this might be iteration number 1 or iteration number 12. Let's go. Let's test. Let's tweak, and continue to apply creativity to get it better and better.
Completely agree. I know from my own experience, if I'm doing speaking or if I'm done a talk, the first time I do the talk, even in my own lounge, I'll hear, see, feel something. And then, of course, you apply it to an audience and it just falls on deaf ears, or they laugh where you didn't expect them to laugh, or there's questions around something that you just threw away as a topic almost. And suddenly that was the most insightful thing that we shared. Can leaders inspire real creativity, or can they stifle it just as part of their own cultural approach to failure?
Totally spot on, Chris, because I think as a leader, creativity is talked about a lot, and LinkedIn polls about the most sought after skills. It's appearing, in the top 2 or 3 every year now, and there is a drive to get more creative businesses, but people aren't quite sure how to do that. And there's obviously number of things, and this is where I develop my create formula to help people understand that. So at the very essence, it's about that curiosity. It's about the creative capital that everybody in your business already has. We are all humans there. We all have the capacity for creativity. So as a leader, you can either encourage that and set up pipelines to kind of start to harvest all these ideas that will be pinging off all around your business all the time, or you can have no pipelines and stop that dead. So even before you start training people to be more creative, or putting plans in place to have ideas sessions and all those things you can do, you can start just by maximising the creative capital you already have in that business with your team, with everybody there. And again, it's about building pipelines. It's about creating places where those ideas can sit and be reviewed, and just having a culture where it's encouraged, and that goes all the way through to the environment you sit in. You know, beige walls, beige thinking. You know, you have to sit in an environment that inspires you, or be allowed to access an environment that inspires you. I've proven that sitting at your desk is the worst place for creativity. So what's a leader going to do? Because yes, you do need a desk, but where else can you go? Where else can you encourage your staff to go to be in the best place for ideas?
Very good. I always say a leader should go last in idea generation, because as soon as the leader goes first, everybody follows their lead because they are the leader, and therefore sit back and allow the ideas to surface, and then the leader can champion or adopt which one they feel should be best invested in.
I agree. And in fact, when I used to run idea generation sessions in larger corporations, I would encourage the leader not to attend. Because, first of all, if you are doing it, ideally you have an external facilitator, because they will keep control, because he, and I do use that gender advisedly, he who holds the flip chart pen and the power, those are the ideas that are ratified. So a facilitator will stop that happening as much. It will allow all the voices in the room. So when I would, ask about the dynamics of the group, I'd be very mindful of the leader and their style, because they can very often completely destroy the creative dynamic in a group. I would also, encourage people, if you're putting together teams, to run ideas sessions, whether it's on a client brief or an internal business challenge that you have. Where are the fresh eyes? Where are the people who know nothing about this? I used to run regular idea generation sessions for marketing agencies on client briefs, on pitch briefs. And I would always ask for people outside of the creative team and outside of the account management team to come along, because that is a perspective that they cannot replicate because they're too close to the challenge. In fact, we had one where we were working on a pitch for a high street retailer, and it was the security guard who I'd kind of cajoled in to the session, who came up with the idea that won that agency the pitch. Everybody is capable of creative gold. You've just got to be receptive to what people say in that moment and understand that what they articulate is never going to be that fully polished idea. It's going to have the germ, the little gem in it that you can then build out afterwards.
Well, to reflect good idea generation, I've been doing your 20 days to creative thought process, and every day, for the benefit of the audience, I receive an email in the morning, and it challenges me to have creative thought around a technique that Jodie is asking me to dive into. And I love it, by the way. It really has been very enjoyable, playful, and has created some really creative thoughts in my head. How did you come up with that as an idea, and what's the purpose behind it? Is it a lead magnet? Where's it coming from?
Yeah, so the original spark came from 3 years ago. I was celebrating my 20th business birthday, which was in February, which had 20 working days. So the whole theme kind of wrote itself. And I wanted to do something around creativity, and I wanted to show people that even the most cynical or skeptical about how creative they were can be, trained and supported to access different thinking. So that's where it came from. So the 20 days was because, it was my 20th anniversary. Also because, there is an infinite number of tools in my toolkit. And if you do that for 20 days, I guarantee 100 ideas. And at the start, I think most people go, there's no way on God's earth I'm getting 100 ideas on a single challenge. And if you follow those emails, and it would take, maybe you could sort of give me some feedback, between 5 and 15 minutes every day. I mean, it depends how long you want to spend on it. I would say average 10 minutes a day gets you 100 ideas. I think that, for me, was a demonstration of the power of creativity, but creativity using tools and techniques, not just sitting there like, this kind of notion of creativity of, I'll just sit here until my muse strikes. No one's got time for that, Chris. you can apply process, you can apply tools, you can force yourself to think in new ways. It's a skill that you can take on board. And yes, I use it to get people into a creative mindset. And I use it as an engagement tool as well, because that is my money where my mouth is. You do this, and if it fails, that's on me, not on the person doing the micro course.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage anybody to go and dive into that 20-day challenge, and it's on your businessallotment.co.uk site. Is that the right site for it?
Yes.
Amazing. And I'll put the links to that as part of the show notes for anybody that wants to dive in. And listen, I have first-hand experience on doing it, and it's hugely insightful. Can I just ask about alcohol and creative thoughts? Where are you on that? Because people say, I get my best ideas when I'm in pub, and it just comes to me. And sorry for anybody that doesn't like my accent there, but I don't know where that came from. Anyway, yes.
I love the fact that in your head, pub and northernness are somehow inextricably linked.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, I've never been asked that before, Chris. And well gone are the days when I was, kind of a pub or bar goer. I would say, I think there are a couple of things that came to mind when you said that. Firstly, you are often in company. And whilst, creative purists will say, oh, this whole brainstorm collaboration thing, it's a load of nonsense, I'm the biggest creative power I have, and therefore, creativity should be a solo activity. And yes, it can be. I am a big advocate of that collaborative conversation around ideas, because we, as a business owner and as a person, but I'll talk about it through a business lens, we know our business inside out, as I've said. That perspective inside out is terrible for creativity. Outside in is where the power lies, shifting out of your perspective. It's hard to leave your own eyeballs behind and look through somebody else's eyes. Having conversations where you might be throwing an idea around or just having that discussion about something, everyone will have different perspectives on that. That will, again, spark new routes of thinking that you would not have accessed had you been thinking about that on your own. So I think there is something lovely about that creative conversation and challenge. People, might look at you, Chris, and go, well, that's a terrible idea, Chris. What are you thinking of? And that in itself is a super useful thing to be kind of engaged in. So I think there is that piece. Also, you don't even have to be thinking about or talking about the idea. You might be bubbling away at something in your subconscious, and somebody says something completely random about, the circus, and your brain will take that idea, and I call it a random spark, and it's what I call this creative dissonance is set up. So you're thinking about, what am I going to do about this new presentation? I need a new opening, and I can't quite think about it. Someone just says, I'm not going to do a northern accent. Oh, I went to the circus last week. And your brain is now holding, opening of a new keynote and circus, and it doesn't like the dissonance of two unrelated things. So it will mash them up. And then, a little while later, you'll be kind of sitting in front of your notebook and you'll go, my God, what if I juggled at the beginning? Or, what if I came in a unicycle? And you won't know where that idea came from, but it's that thing that has happened. It's mashed it up. So I think that kind of conversational thing is brilliant because it gives you loads of random sparks that will kick off new ideas.
Yeah.
In terms of the effects of the alcohol, again, I wouldn't know from a kind of brain perspective, but I would guess that it starts to shut down your sort of frontal cortex. So we all know you get terribly brave and idiotic when you're drunk. And you think, I'm just going to jump off that 6-foot wall because I'm invincible. And I think it's that oppression of the self-critical narrative that we all run probably is absolutely bloody brilliant. In fact, I might just go and get drunk now, Chris, and see what happens, because I think that can only help that options, that divergent thinking piece and getting into that mindset. So, it could be good. It could be good for your health. I mean, that feels like a stretch.
Well, just for integrity and values, I do serve a serve framework, and alcohol does not sit in part of my framework for living our best selves. But, we're here to talk about how we can become more creative. the land of AI now, Jodie, is that an enabler or a disabler for our creative thought?
I think it's got to be an enabler, whether you rile against it or you've embraced it fully. I think, and I'm not an expert at AI. I don't, I use it as a tool. I use it as a tool. Often when I'm thinking, whether I am thinking, right, I'm going to write a new blog, or I'm going to design a new tool to help people think about this part of their business in a new way. What I used to do is I used to go on Google and I used to say, I don't know, say I'm looking at ideas for client onboarding. And I would go to all those dusty, unused pages, all from the first page of Google, all the way through to like page 20. And I would look at what everybody's saying and doing and suggesting about onboarding your clients. That then becomes a sort of data set that I don't need to worry about because it's out there. Mostly it's quite obvious, it's quite boring. It's often quite big corporate approaches that have been kind of reverse engineered for small businesses. So it doesn't fit, it's boring, it's over engineered, it's not very fun. So I will then, use that as okay, that's all out there. It's all fairly boring and pretty tedious. And actually what I have found, it's the same three sources regurgitated time and time and time again. So then that will spark me into new directions. With AI, I can do all that research super quickly. So I will ask ChatGPT, give me 10 ideas to onboard a client. No, it's just scraping the internet. It's not generating stuff by itself. So what I would tend to do then go, okay, that's the conversation that people are having about onboarding. I can be more creative than that. Let's get some fresh ways to do it. Let's, excite people to think in much more creative ways about this thing. So I will use it as a springboard away from the ideas it generates rather than into, because I've seen its creative powers. It's fine. It's fine. It does a job. If you're in a rush and you need a blog, it's a good place to dive in and get a few hundred words that you can tailor. But for me, as a small business owner, whether you're a presenter or whatever, you have a brand, and what it has complete dearth of is brand vibe, brand experience, brand language. So at the very least, if you're using it to create, the start of something, you have got to drench it in your own brand personality. Otherwise, you're just joining the rest of the kind of magnolia stuff that's out there already.
Being more beige again.
Yeah, don't be beige, Chris.
I do absolutely support that. It is only scraping the ideation of everybody else's thoughts that have already happened, and actually you could be on the cusp of your thought, your idea, your inspiration that is the AI of the future that's going to be scraped, and therefore perhaps you could precluding yourself from your own creativity. If somebody's listening now, like, oh, I love this conversation, but I just don't know where to start. What would be your, well, why don't you just try this today to try to become more creative? What would be your little golden hack?
So I would, I'm going to cheat and have two. So I'm going to say creative workouts are brilliant because we would all have more good habits in our lives if we didn't come back with that. I haven't got time for that. I could be a brilliant, gym goer if only I had time for it. Or I could read more books. For me, 60 seconds every morning is all you need to start the process. And when you sit down and say, right, I'm going to think up as many ideas in a minute to use a paperclip, which is a really old kind of, classic divergent thinking technique, you might only get 3 in a minute. That's fine. Come back and do it again tomorrow. And your list will grow and grow as your brain gets more used to thinking in that way. So I would definitely say creative workouts every morning is a great way to do it. Also, you are probably having more ideas than you realise. It's just we're not paying attention to them. So if you are a tea or a coffee drinker, or if you are a hot beverage consumer, put a pack of Post-it notes and a pen by your kettle. And when you're waiting for the kettle to boil and you're kind of staring out the window, if you've written down your challenge, like I said before, write it down so you're consciously briefing your brain. As you stare out the window and that kettle is bubbling away, it's got a little bit of white noise to it, which is really useful sometimes to stop you thinking too deeply about something, just see what comes up in your brain. Because I will always have a notepad by my kettle, because as I'm staring out the window and, you've got 3 or 4 minutes as it's bubbling away, stuff happens in your brain and we just don't recognize it a lot of the time. So identify those times where stuff is happening and you can unhook it out of your brain and into your business.
Fully support that. I think maybe we should just be more intentional, put the phone down and not become the echo chamber of everybody else's thoughts on Instagram or LinkedIn, and allow our own thoughts to surface from that white noise or intentional thought process about trying to be creative.
Yeah.
Do we become less creative as we get older, simply because we do just genuinely live in routines, echo chambers, and platitudes of the people that we spend our time with?
I think you can be. And I think when you look at, certain artists who are in what would be called their twilight era, I mean, what do you call it without being rude? They can suddenly reach their most fertile, part of their creative life. But I think for me, I found as I got older, there was more of a need to go and do something more purposeful. So I took up ceramics, I illustrate, I do a bit of photography, I do embroidery, I do all these things that put you back in a learning state. Because as we become, I've been running my business for 23 years. I don't know everything, but I know a damn sight more than I did when I started. And I think our brains can become a bit lazy about that business as usual. I do this, I do this, and I do this. And less becomes a huge challenge for you. When I first picked up a piece of clay 4 years ago, I felt like an absolute idiot. And it was so joyous to feel like that, because we don't feel like we know nothing often enough. And at the point at which you surrender any standard of achievement, it becomes all about the process and exploration. And, I had got used to a tolerance of failure because I am a creative by heart. But going back and starting something new like pottery, my failure of tolerance had to triple immediately. And from my own creative skill and level, that was probably the best thing I've done in 10 years.
Yeah. Okay. You're 23 years, and by the way, full support for 23 years of working for yourself. Can you give us a snippet of a real proud moment where a client has reached into their creativity and created something that was hugely transformational for them or their business?
Goodness. Okay. So, one of the kind of reference experiences I do talk about a lot is the security guard who came up with the idea that won the pitch. And I think for me, because that encapsulates everything I know about creativity and about it coming from surprising people at surprising moments at surprising times, and you don't have to be an expert in anything related to what you're looking at. So I think for me, that was wonderful. But before I jumped on this call, Chris, I got an email from somebody who's in the startup shed with me, who was struggling to articulate what she was all about. And the last session, I shared a lot of creative tools about how to tell a story. And she emailed me with a paragraph about, what do you think of this? This is going to be my new pitch. And she had picked an analogy. I talk a lot about using metaphor and analogy as a way of helping you articulate a brand story. And from where she had been on the last meeting a week ago and had stumbled across her words, had said things in a really kind of obvious, unengaging way, as we all start there, she then wrote me this most amazing thing based around a metaphor that she'd used to explain how she transforms her clients. And it was like it was a different business that had written that. And I think that, because she'd used the creative tools and thought in a different way, how do I communicate what is important about what I do? That's going to transform the way she goes to her audience, and that will transform the engagement she gets, and it will attract the customers she really wants in her business. So I think, I encourage people to apply creativity everywhere. And she did it, and it's completely transformed the way she goes out into the world with her business.
Well, it's a beautiful thing to see you still so inspired and energized about that transformational interruption you've given somebody, because you've been doing it for 23 years, and yet I can still see that you've got that real spark in you that says, that's why I do what I do. Is there something that we've not covered here that you're just itching to tell us about in terms of creativity or the art of creativity, and or why it's so important as humans?
I mean, we've had quite the wide-ranging discussion, so I think we've covered most bases. I think for me, it keeps coming back to this doing something with your hands, because I think it's becoming a lost art, of doing something. And there is some research around stimulating your fingertips and how that helps you think in a different way. I mean, I have some little gyro spinners that I got 3D printed that I give to clients, because it's that thing of being able to, again, diverting your hands. So whether you are building something of Lego, and I would always say, building a Lego kit with the instructions is fabulous, but actually just getting 10 kilos of assorted Lego off of eBay and using that as a sandbox and just creating something, doing something mad, not with no end in mind. We are so results driven. I think fall back in love with the process, because at the point, I do a warm-up sometimes when I'm doing talks where I get people to draw the person sitting next to them, because, and I would say at the beginning, the moment I ask the audience to do that, 95% of them look utterly horrified, because they know they are crap at it. So I give them permission to completely embrace the fact it's going to be crap. So they let go, caring about the result. It all becomes about enjoying the process. And we just don't do that enough.
So let's get it in our hands. Let's get out there and let's experience the art of play again. What else would you be leaving us with, Jodie, as your 3 fundamentals for leading a long, happy and fulfilling life?
I think I've covered them all, so it's more kind of a recap, really, I think, Chris. 1, be curious. It does take an effort to be curious sometimes, because also as we gain more knowledge and insight, we apply that immediately. So be curious. I talk about assumptive thinking as being one of the biggest creativity killers. If you can spot the assumptions you're making when you're approaching a challenge and kind of shoot them dead between the eyes, you will uncover a well of creativity that will completely surprise you. So I think keep that curious mindset, going. I think being ridiculous. We are taught to conform. We are taught to shut up in class. We are taught to be a certain way. I mean, particularly if you're not the kind of, gender normal white, sorry, Chris, had to come up, everyone else has been taught to conform to a society and to a culture that, so everyone has their place. Being ridiculous will make you stand out, and that will be your superpower. And thirdly, I think if you aren't even, I would always say go and do something creative, as we've just talked about. But if not, just make it a joyful thing. Whether that is running, although, I would say if that is, a chore, sure, go run, but find something else. What is joyful for you? And make time. I am a full-time business owner with, kind of parents who need looking after and 2 kids that are 100% demanding 100% of the time. But I just carve out a tiny bit of time every week to do something joyful, because it feeds your soul and it feeds your creativity. And to tap into that, I think, is the best thing you can do for your own self-preservation of your sanity and your well-being.
Beautiful. Well, what a nice 5 values to find joy or experience joy or be a provider of joy to others. So I fully support that. So let's be curious. Let's be ridiculous. Let's try to have more joy in our days. Jodie, I really want to say thank you so much for the 20 days of inspiration you've already given to me. And for anybody who is curious or wants us to be ridiculous, go and join Jodie's 20-day challenge, and I assure you it'll make you think differently, just about the simple fact of how to have 100 ideas with a polo. There you go. Jodie Newman, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you, and carry on being joyful, curious, and ridiculous.
And you, Chris. Thank you.